Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back from our lunch break, and let me ask you all to find your seats. In the interest of time, I would like us to proceed to our last, certainly not least, panel discussion. I hope the discussants are ready. Please kindly take your seats so we can proceed and start with our program. Ladies and gentlemen, without much further ado, as we are reaching the climax of our conference, I would like to invite your attention to the next topic, which I'm sure will be very interesting to hear how the deliberations proceed. The next topic, regulation of competition in a dynamic world. And I would like to invite the chair and moderator for this session, Director, Worksmans, and Chairman of Lex Africa, Mr. Peter Steyn. Please give him a hand as he comes to the stage. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to be here and to welcome you to the last, but I think very interesting panel of the day. I think technology has throughout history been a game changer, leading to the rise and fall of empires, kingdoms, and businesses. So today, the advances in the digital world and technology has disrupted traditional markets worldwide, raising challenges for regulators worldwide. In COMESA, we have had the successful example of the Commission intervention with regard to the Jumia platform, and that was just earlier this year. In other countries and jurisdictions, regulators are considering how to deal with digital markets, including Amazon, Google, Apple, Meta, and TikTok. I think one of the key issues is not to restrict innovation and efficiencies in these new markets, but still balance competition and public interest concerns, like data protection and other consumer protection issues. These are complicated and interesting issues, and this panel will discuss how competition regulators should deal with them. We have a very good mix of speakers, from UNCTAD, 2 African regulators, a private practitioner, as well as an academic. And we hope to have an interactive session and stimulate debate and questions from the floor. I'm just going to briefly introduce our panelists. First, we've got Teresa Moreira, who's going to be delivering the keynote address. She's been the head of the Competition and Consumer Policies branch of UNCTAD since 5 October 2016. She previously served as Consumer Director General of Portugal from January 2010 to September 2016, and as a member of the board of the Portuguese Competition Authority from 2003 to 2008. She also served as Portugal's Director General and Deputy Director General for International Economic Relations and held senior positions at the former Directorate for Competition. She worked for 20 years as a teaching assistant at the Faculty of Law in Lisbon University in the areas of international economic law and European law, as well as European competition law and European economic law. My colleague from my home country, South Africa, Mr. Hardin Ratchisusu, is the Deputy Commissioner of the Competition Commission of South Africa, appointed by the Minister of Trade and Industry in 2016. He is currently also adjunct Associate Professor with the Graduate School of Business Leadership of the University of South Africa. He has worked in the regulatory field with extensive experience in the competition regulatory environment in both the public and private sector. He has worked on cases in several industries, including communications, broadcasting, mining, chemicals, retailing, property, healthcare, and food. He actively participates in international platforms such as the OECD, BRICS, UNCTAD, and the African Competition Forum, and has occasionally published papers in academic journals. He holds a BCom in Honours in Economics from the University of Venda, a Master's in Economics from the University of Witwatersrand, and a Master of Business Leadership from the University of South Africa. Thomas Janssens, who's a dear friend and old colleague from the International Bar Association, he heads the Freshfields Global Antitrust Competition and Trade Practice Group, a role he combines with his broad client practice. Based in Brussels, he advises on EU and international antitrust law, covering transactional and conduct matters, as well as related litigation. Clients turn to him for complex EU and international mandates, especially those requiring strategic management of cross-border challenges and parallel proceedings before several authorities. He has great international experience and perspective across all areas of antitrust risk and compliance in a wide range of industries. He leads a team of Freshfields lawyers and local counsel around the world. He has significant experience of merger control enforcement in Africa and has had the honor of being involved in training of antitrust officials from COMESA and its member states. He co-led the firm's Antitrust Africa group for several years and continues to be an active member. He was educated at the University of Leuven in Belgium and Columbia Law School in the US, and is a regular commentator on topics of EU antitrust law and an active member of the International Bar Association, where he recently completed a 3-year term as co-chair of the IBA antitrust section. Professor Marek Martynishin is a professor of competition law and policy at Queen's University Belfast in Northern Ireland. He specializes in international and cross-border aspects of competition law and policy, including the limits of extraterritorial jurisdiction and state involvement in anti-competitive practices, including issues like foreign subsidies. His research has a strong perspective of new competition systems and new agencies, especially in developing countries and economies in transition. He is a non-governmental advisor to the International Competition Network and has presented his work in various fora, including UNCTAD and COMESA. Last but not least, we have Mr. Boniface Makongo, who's been the Director for Competition and Consumer Protection at the Competition Authority of Kenya since 2011. He's a lawyer by profession and has 11 years of experience in consumer and competition law. So I'd like to welcome the panel to join me on the stage, and Teresa, if you would deliver the keynote address. Thank you very much.
Well, good afternoon, and allow me to formally thank again the COMESA Competition Commission for the very kind invitation and for the very well-organized conference and warm hospitality that we have all been enjoying very much. I would like to say that UNCTAD is here represented by my colleague Elizabeth Gashuri, who was the moderator of the first panel, and myself. And we are extremely pleased to be here because, of course, UNCTAD has a long-standing tradition of supporting African developing countries, young competition authorities, and also regional economic organizations of the African continent that have selected competition law at regional level. I also want to acknowledge George Lipimile because, of course, he was the first head of the commission, but previously he was also a member of what is now the Competition and Consumer Policies branch of UNCTAD, so we feel an added connection here, and we are very happy to see his excellent work being praised. I was asked to talk about regulation of competition in a dynamic world, but with a concrete reference to digital marketplaces and the digital economy. I will try to highlight the key issues that have been raised from the point of view of competition law and policy, then present a little bit what are the policy options, sharing with you a very brief global overview of what are the options that have already been adopted by a number of advanced jurisdictions and also less advanced jurisdictions, and then finally I will conclude. So just for those who don't know, UNCTAD is a part of the United Nations Secretariat. We have 195 members and have this very special mandate of assisting developing countries to better integrate the world economy. We are also the focal point for competition law and policy, being the guardians of the UN set of competition rules and principles, which is a set of recommendations adopted by the UN General Assembly in 1980, and which recognize the contribution of competition to the development of developing countries, thereby opening an era of many years, as you see, so almost 43, which witnessed the enactment of competition laws across the globe, the setting up of the institutions, and competition advocacy, multi-stakeholder engagement, etc. So we are very proud that we had this role, and this is a role that we still carry, of course, with great pleasure, since technical cooperation is one of our key pillars of work, as well as consensus building and research and analysis. Let me just say that we are also the focal point for consumer protection, as I mentioned at the end of the morning, because we are the guardians of another key instrument already mentioned by several participants this morning, the United Nations Guidelines for Consumer Protection, which were lastly revised in 2015. So I'm just going now to share a couple of slides with some data, hoping that you, after the lunch and with the final panel, I think our job is hard enough, so hoping that this will keep you fully interested and awake, and then I will give the floor to the chair and to my fellow panelists. So just some data just to set the stage. This data is actually from the International Telecommunications Union, which is, of course, an organization also within the UN system based in Geneva. Just to tell you that in 2022, internet use, of course, grew, such as mobile cell phone subscriptions, and you have their disaggregated data also through regions across the world. So, of course, developing countries being very well represented. Also that ICT services have become more affordable in a way, which of course allow more consumers, more small businesses to really make the most out of the digital economy and explore its opportunities despite the risks and challenges that we are aware of. Something a little bit more specific from the G20 regulations on data. So we all know that data is linked to a number of areas. I would draw your attention to the table that talks about sector-specific legislation because, of course, we are familiar with digital marketplaces, so the big tech platforms that most competition authorities are either examining through market studies or investigating through law enforcement. Of course, have, let's say, multiplied a number of competition concerns, but we have been hearing about competition cases against the, let's say, abusive collection, gathering, and treatment of data in other sectors, such as the financial services sector, such as the health sector, and I wanted to draw your attention to this because this may not yet be very common in certain parts of the world, but definitely will arrive here. So just to sum up, features of the digital economy that, as you can see, features, this is not a neutral assessment for my part, already from a competition point of view. Of course, market concentration for obvious reasons, high switching costs and user lock-in, which of course raise serious concerns also from the point of view of consumer protection policy. merger control and killer acquisitions, self-preferencing by digital platforms, and collusive practices through the use of algorithms, and possibly also through the increasing use of artificial intelligence. Let me just focus a little bit on platforms, because I think this is what most competition authorities are really concerned with. We know that the business model relies too much on data. We know that this data, in a way, can be used to better serve consumers' needs and interests, while at the same time this also paves the way for discrimination, for abuses, and especially for very little opportunities for consumer choice. Just a mention to UNCTAD's digital economy report that is produced every 2 years, not by our team, but by the team that deals with technology, of course, again, focusing on developing countries. And again, to show that, as we well know, that of course digital platforms also have taken a very big weight in global value chains, and that traditional sectors, and here again you see banking, telecommunications, obviously advertising, which is really the key source of income of digital platforms, and you have some figures until the end of 2022. Now, I wanted just to spend a couple of words on competition and data, because this is something that is also very concerning from the point of view of consumer protection, and because COMESA also has this double mandate as my own team, I thought this was justified. So consumers really have very little choice. In a number of countries across the world, we have been witnessing the adoption of data protection legislation, following a little bit the global data protection regulation of the European Union. Countries like Brazil have issued a national law for protection of data. India has drafted a bill that needs yet to be approved. Even China has ventured into this area, and of course I'm not even talking about other jurisdictions. But when we talk about competition and how can competitors or small businesses also have access to data, consumers' choice, consumers' consent are obviously very important factors, and I wanted to draw your attention to this. So often what we have seen is that there has been some tension in cases that involve both competition authorities and data protection regulators in more advanced jurisdictions, because of course the goals behind their mandates are not necessarily the same, but especially when data protection are connected to fundamental rights, of course, data protection regulators tend to have a mandate that tends to prevail often over competition, and of course the outcomes are not necessarily compatible. So I just mentioned also the algorithms and artificial intelligence, and I wanted to let this here as a reference. Now, let me get to the core of what I really wanted to say. Possible policy options. And this is something that has been discussed in national, in academic, in international, different regional fora. I just sum it up with 3 questions. Well, the last one is not really a question, it's more of a statement. But the issue is that we saw, of course, like all of you, I would assume, or at least like many of you, a huge change in the last 5 years. So we moved from a pre-pandemic situation where, despite the concerns, the key trend of discussions was about not hampering innovation. So competition authorities tended, and I think they were quite cautious, waiting to, in a way, better understand the business models, sometimes reaching out to sector-specific regulators or other regulators before they actually started intervening. Here, of course, market studies were extremely useful to get that information. So we moved from this situation of a little bit wait and see, but not in a passive manner, actually. So investing in the comprehensive understanding of sectors and business models, to a situation where we are seeing the spreading of competition law amendments in order to make sure that the legal provisions are fit for purpose. I will share some examples soon enough. So from this point of view, allow me just to mention the European Union experience, so DG Comp, because I find it very inspiring that the European Commission, like the national competition authorities, continue to enforce the two treaty provisions that have the same wording since what is now the EU, what was then the European Economic Community was established. And I used to myself be very partial, so I kept thinking there is no need to adjust legislation because look at what DG Comp does. You can adjust your analysis to different markets, to evolving markets this way. But it is true that amending legislation has the benefit of making, let's say, the boundaries of what is legal, what is allowed and what is forbidden clearer, and definitely they contribute to business predictability. So I think this is a very important element of the enabling environment that, of course, is associated with market economy. So I would say that I now understand this, but I wanted to mention this because I thought this would be an interesting point. Second point, or second question. So until 5 years ago, or 3 to 4 years ago, we were still discussing, do we need regulation? Do we need ex-ante regulation? And sometimes thinking that, oh, maybe if we choose to adopt ex-ante regulation, then we won't need to pursue competition law enforcement. And I think now, again, it is very clear that regulation, ex-ante regulation, is extremely necessary. And again, let me mention the EU Digital Markets Act, which really encourages a competition compliance culture. So regulation, of course, is extremely, can be extremely effective. Now, we cannot presume or conclude that because we will adopt ex-ante regulation, we are able to disregard competition law and policy. So competition law enforcement is extremely needed in a very vigorous manner, and that is really what the overall view will say. But regulation, again, has the benefit of clarifying to businesses which ones are on the spot, so to speak. Look at the gatekeepers definition in the Digital Markets Act. And in other jurisdictions like the UK, I believe they have another, my God, I cannot find the exact words, just trying to, it's the strategic market status, and it will be like this. In Germany, it's the paramount significance for competition across markets. So with these definitions, sometimes in legislation, sometimes in ex-ante regulation, companies will know if they meet this criteria, and they will have probably to abide by some new obligations. And so ex-ante regulation and regulation is clearly something that is also on the rise. Now, the second question was more, should there be collaboration? And I did not even interrogate myself, because for me it was obvious that it was extremely important to really promote collaboration between different regulatory authorities, of course, data protection, consumer protection, but also telecoms, financial services, etc. And within this collaboration, I wanted to mention that a multi-stakeholder approach is also very much needed, because businesses benefit from guidance so that we have the predictability that I mentioned, so that competition authorities can update, can have more sophisticated appropriate tools like digital tools to detect and prosecute cartels, like in a number of jurisdictions, and also be able to make the best possible use of technology to really identify possible infringements and stop them, sanctioning them. So now I will very quickly, and I'm afraid I will not really mention in the interest of time. I hope I still have a few minutes. Thank you very much. I wanted to share with you examples that are far from being comprehensive, and I apologize for not always mentioning the African continent, but since my good friend Hardin is here as the representative of the South African Competition Commission, which is extremely active, I thought he would probably mention this, and I did not need to cover. But what you are seeing are just examples of legislative and regulatory measures. So of course I mentioned the DMA, the amendment of Germany's competition law, the UK amendment as well, Australia, Japan, India, China, the Russian Federation, Turkey. I think I did not mention also the US, but I want to say that of course there are a number of bill proposals, some already approved. I believe the Open Apps Markets Act and the American Innovation and Choice Online Act, and there are a lot of other pieces of legislation in the pipeline. So we see a huge convergence even of policy options, despite several differences or nuances between all different jurisdictions as far as content is concerned. But there is clearly a recognition that legislative and regulatory measures are important. Another point I wanted to mention is to share with you some examples of soft law initiatives. Again, I chose some European, some Asian, some Latin American, some in, let's say, Central Asia, so to speak. I do mention here South Africa, the revised guidelines on small mergers. I wanted also to add 4 points. So the United States Federal Trade Commission, to my knowledge, issue a policy statement on unfair methods of competition. The US and the EU launched the Joint Technology Competition Policy Dialogue. The UK Competition and Markets Authority and the telecom regulator Ofcom issued joint guidance, including a code of conduct for digital platforms, and in Brazil, the Brazilian Competition Authority, CADE, and the data protection regulator issued also a joint understanding following the adoption of the data protection legislation. Okay, on law enforcement, I would have to spend half an hour, so please excuse me for being very, very how can I put it, limited, because there are so many cases. And this is where I think this is quite reassuring for us as consumers, as citizens, as users, and some of you as enforcers, because in the EU, the DG Comp has issued, I don't know how many decisions, and has several others in the pipeline. The US, the same thing at federal, state level, and even private actions, so in courts. In Europe, Germany started in 2013 and has acted against Amazon, Booking.com, Facebook, Meta, Google, Alphabet, Apple, France, the UK, Italy, Spain, the Netherlands, just to give you an example, India also. So I think we can see that, and that's why I added the dates, the years. There has been huge, very vigorous, very active law enforcement in the last 2-3 years, which again I think is very reassuring. And again, as you see, combined with legal amendments, with new regulatory instruments, and with soft guidance, which I think more or less shows what is the way to go. I'm reaching the end. I wanted to make, of course, coming from the UN, the point on international cooperation. We heard Fred Jenny's initial keynote today, and it is, of course, a little bit absurd that, for instance, WhatsApp in India refuses to respect users' rights as far as data protection because there is not yet a data protection legislation in force. These companies, I would suggest, should abide by the highest standards and apply them regardless of the jurisdiction at stake, because that should be in their commercial interests, and of course it would better serve their clients. And within international cooperation, let me highlight how regional cooperation, from the point of view of UNCTAD, is the best possible avenue, especially for developing countries. Why? Because there will be multiple experience, so there will be advanced jurisdictions, there will be small and young jurisdictions, there will be competition authorities that do not have the resources, do not have the experience yet, and through competences at regional level, namely, as in the case of CAMESA, frankly, resources can be pooled, activities can be launched, the exchange of staff, and even leverage vis-à-vis big players, not just the big tech, but pharmaceutical companies and big industrial producers. I think it applies to every country. So we think regional cooperation is really a very good choice. And of course, through regional cooperation, we all enhance international cooperation. I'm really getting to an end. So my final remarks are just a little bit to conclude. We think that the choice of the policy options and the instruments, of course, depends on a number of factors that have to do with your national specificities, but none of these instruments is exclusive. That is to say, just because you choose first to pursue an amendment of your competition law, that should not at all prevent you from considering regulation and soft law, and combine all of this with very strong and vigorous law enforcement. Also to tell you that we think that collaboration at national level between all sorts of regulators is extremely important, again, for the enforcers to really be able to catch up with this very fast evolving, dynamic, new technologies world that I believe it's very difficult to grasp, and that legislation and regulation tend to be always a little bit behind. So it is very important to share all the knowledge, to gather the data, to consult with all the experts. It's very also reassuring to see that a lot of competition authorities are investing in data units and data treatment for this purpose to enhance their intelligence. And finally, I do believe that even though this is a competition gathering, it is very important to consult with your governments, because what is at stake here is, I would say, goes beyond the competitive nature of markets and the good functioning of markets. It's something that has implications for access by micro and small and medium-sized companies to be able to export goods through digital marketplaces. It has something that affects us all as consumers, as citizens. And so I believe this is something that really has a very important political dimension. I also want to say that I do believe that business engagement is essential. And I always believe in, how can I put it, encouraging self-regulation, codes of conduct, etc. And I'm looking at some of the very senior and expert councils of business here. And of course, we do believe that global challenges hopefully should be worthy of global solutions, and we want to work together with all other international organizations. This is what we're doing, regional organizations and other stakeholders. And we have the advantage as UNCTAD to provide the largest platform in all areas of our mandate But of course, we are very much inclusive, so you are all welcome to our meetings to share with us your concerns, your needs, your challenges, your points of view, so that we have a better understanding and are able to really duly advise the less experienced and less resourced that come to us. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Teresa, for an excellent introduction into such an interesting topic. I could have a whole conference just on this topic, and unfortunately we have limited time, so I'm going to ask my colleague from South Africa, Hardin, to give us an introduction into what the South African experience has been and what the South African Commission has been focusing on.
Thank you very much, Peter, for the very kind introduction, and of course to the keynote speaker. I know a session like this is suited for Bill, because if Bill were talking, everyone would be awake. They would think it's still the morning, but we do have Bill in the room. Thanks to COMESA for the invitation. And indeed, for us, I will repeat what Commissioner said, former Commissioner, that this is really a momentous occasion. It's really the 10 years worthy to celebrate. And as the South African Competition Commission, we have worked very closely with COMESA on tangible cases. Our case teams talk, and that is the cooperation that maybe you will not be able to see from the outside. And I know that the former CEO acknowledges this and acknowledges this very, very, very well. We are talking here about, I think, digital markets, and I think the challenge has been, in the past, we would say, sometimes some issues affect, certain sections of society than others. But digital markets affect all of us. Developed economies, every one of us is affected by this, which then calls for really need for coordination and deeper cooperation. If we cannot collaborate, I know we may not agree on abuses of dominance, which ones should we pursue, is it public interest, which ones to pursue. But on the digital economy, we should be finding each other, we should be finding common ground. I say this because whatever happens in advanced economies could be negated if there is no action in the developed world. So if there are no initiatives on the African continent, whatever happens in the EU may well be frustrated by these particular entities when they approach a market like ours. And how have we approached this in South Africa? We, in 2020, published a strategy paper, Competition in the Digital Economy. And we considered various options. Do we prosecute these companies, follow the prosecutions, or do we scan our own local market and see what are the challenges that our local firms are facing, and other challenges that are presented by these digital platforms, but also particularly looking at opening up opportunities for local firms in our economy. And this is what I think the keynote is really about. So we would like to see a lot of participation by local firms in these markets. And I think Frederick Jenny just spoke about some practices by Booking.com that could negatively affect, I suppose, the entire tourism sector in developing economies. So we looked at our market, scanned our market, looked for potential for killer acquisitions. We've published guidelines. We have initiated market inquiries. We have taken on some investigations, and I think the commissioner did speak about the Meta case that we have referred. We will be finalizing an inquiry into online intermediation platforms. We have initiated an inquiry into the distribution of media content on digital platforms. And all these initiatives are initiatives we are learning from other markets, but we also are quite conscious that it will not be enough for the continent. It will not be enough for just one national authority to be tackling these issues on the continent. Hence, I think seeing the growth of the COMESA Competition Commission does provide that platform where in the next 2 to 3 years we would potentially be talking about cases that or initiatives that we are pursuing at a regional level or at a continental level, depending on how things move. As we know, there are a couple of other developments. So this would be, just initial thoughts on what we have meaningfully done in our case. Thank you.
No, thank you, Hardin. It's good that South Africa is taking a multi-pronged approach. And I think I'd like to then move over to my colleague on the left from Kenya to get some inputs about what's been happening in Kenya. Boniface.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I think I want to appreciate the COMESA Competition Commission for organizing this event. We work very closely with the Commission in achievement of our mandate. And I think this is a very auspicious event because it enables us to exchange ideas and learn from the experiences of other agencies, both in the region and globally. Now, on the issue of the digital space, equally the Kenyan Competition Authority has realized that our current legal framework, which is fairly robust for traditional enforcement of traditional, what I would call contraventions of consumer protection and competition. However, we realize that merely focusing on the current provisions, which look at prohibited practices, abuse of dominance, there's quite a bit that we are not able to address, especially with regard to digital platforms. In our context, we have both what I would call the global platforms that are operating in Kenya, but also we have a significant local players in that space that mimic more or less or are based on the same operating model as the global players. So to address this, we have looked at it from two perspectives. One is to look at it from the perspective of how do we address the abuses that come with this. So basically, in that regard, we have come up or are in the process of amending our legislation because I mentioned that we find that the current legal framework is not adequate enough to address some aspects of abuse, like which are posed by the digital platforms because of the economies of scale that they enjoy because of the data they have, how they're able to lock in customers and basically make it very difficult for people to switch to other products, and basically render entire segments of the economy very uncompetitive for anybody else to invest in them. So we are coming up with amendments to which are more or less essentially meant to address the issue of what we call in our context strategic market position, And essentially how we've defined a strategic market position is having a position of economic strength in the economy that makes an undertaking capable of basically operating in a manner that is independent of both the consumers it's hoping to serve, the suppliers, and also competitors. so that, because we realize that our current provisions on abuse of dominance may not necessarily address that type of power that somebody then acquires in the economy and the abuses that are attendant to that. How we are hoping to then progress that is we're looking at it from two angles. We're looking at it from an angle of soft enforcement, where basically we would be in a position, then authority will be empowered to say that so-and-so enjoys a strategic market position in the economy, and they have to undertake or do the following actions. So those will be commitment decisions. However, if that doesn't work, then we will go back to the traditional hard enforcement, where we may force them, for instance, to sell off certain apps, or to engage in any other conduct that then enables and makes the particular segment that they occupy competitive. Having said that, we have also realized that as a developing country, I think the digital space offers many African countries an opportunity to catch up. In Kenya, we have a lot of young people who are able to come up with apps. They're able to develop content, which they're able to sell. And we think that this needs to be assisted and nurtured so that it can grow into the big corporations that we're talking about. So we feel that these small operators that are coming up should not be muzzled by regulation. So with regard to those, we are looking at two things. One, how we can review our block exemption guidelines or our exemption guidelines. Our law is fairly open-ended on grant of exemptions to see how we can allow these Kenyan firms to grow into the digital space and offer global products. Two is with regard to merger, quill acquisitions, which Hardin had mentioned. We also noticed that when you have a lot of people churning out apps of all kinds and other products, there's been a tendency by what we would call fairly significant and established companies in other countries to come in and buy off these small players. So they are bought off at a stage where they are still, at incumbency, so to speak. And we don't see them then, the acquirers don't seem to be interested in nurturing them to grow, and offer the products they intended to offer initially. What we realize is that they are bought off and they exit the market. So going forward, we are thinking of looking at our merger regulations and thresholds to see how we can create, because some of those, these are firms which would technically not have reached the market in some cases, so they don't have turnover, they are basically just at the idea stage. How we can help those, make sure that the authority is alive to who is acquiring what of the Kenyan companies that are coming up to create content and develop apps, so that going forward we also have, the local companies are enabled to grow to some stage where they are able to compete with other corporations in the same space. Thank you.
Well, of course, Kenya is in the interesting situation where it's a national state in its own right, a member of COMESA and the East African Community. So I think from a business perspective, it's a question of which regulator will actually take jurisdiction. That's an interesting issue as to, is the solution national or regional or continent-wide? But I think on that note, I'd like to ask for an EU perspective from Thomas. I mean, Thomas, to what extent has there been a perception in the European Union that competition law enforcement was insufficient to regulate the practices of, say, large technology companies, and that ex-ante regulation was needed? I mean, are both regimes actually compatible with each other? And is there any lessons you can give us on the EU practical experience for COMESA and Africa in general?
Thank you, Peter. It looks like regulators are sort of becoming a bit the digital disruptors themselves by introducing a new set of rules. And indeed, the EU is very much at the epicenter of that. And we've heard about the DMA, the Digital Markets Act, already from Teresa. Now, up to now, and the DMA is about to take effect in practice, the EU of course, relied very much on, if you want, the general competition law rules and applying those to new challenges, new concepts, new situations. They developed what some would call novel theories of harm to tackle those topics, but always based on existing concepts, and that's been endorsed by the courts. They've of course also had to operate within the existing procedural framework, for example, establishing dominance, showing effects, looking at efficiency claims made by the party or parties involved. And that has had an effect on the time frames as well. And many have found that actually it's been too slow at the European Commission level in terms of bringing those cases and bringing them to conclusion, so making, in a way, ex post enforcement really ex post in the sense of too late. So that's where obviously the question about ex ante regulation comes in, and the European Commission obviously has built up an enormous expertise in terms of understanding market characteristics, understanding the practices in those markets, and they have in a way codified some of those concepts and those novel theories that I refer to into a piece of legislation, the DMA. The DMA applies to a set of core platform services. I won't go into the detail on any of that. And it applies specifically to companies that are identified, designated as gatekeepers. So essentially, that's done on the basis of turnover thresholds and also the number of active users they have in the EU. But this all is aimed to, in a way, capture those organizations that control certain ecosystems or that operate in spaces where it's, in a way, structurally difficult to contest their positions. And so those gatekeepers for those core platform services then are subject to a range of obligations. Prohibitions, mandatory conduct, and as was mentioned by Teresa, this very much puts the emphasis on compliance by those companies. Now, I don't want to create the impression that that is as such anything that's not complex. Obviously, there will be disputes about designation of gatekeepers, about what those obligations mean. Those obligations apply to a broad range of companies, potentially with diverging business models and so on. So you'll have quite a lot of debate. That's inevitable. But of course, you'll have at the same time also the effect of ex ante regulation from the outset. Now, to your question, Peter, what does that mean for the role of competition law? And is there an ongoing role for competition law? For sure there is, in my view. First of all, maybe technically, the European courts have confirmed this, the two can go hand in hand. They serve different purposes, and they might look at different aspects of conduct, and in that case, competition law and regulation is perfectly compatible. Now, obviously, it's also a question for any regulator to spend its resources in a smart way, and so what I think might happen is that competition enforcers will continue using the competition law rules in a way to push a little bit at boundaries, to test those new practices that undoubtedly will emerge, because obviously none of this is static. So we'll have the questions in 3 or 5 years from now again will require new ways of thinking. Nobody will assume that the DMA can just capture that. A last point I would mention is one in relation to injunctive relief. It's interesting that this week actually the the French competition authority adopted a decision against Meta, and it acknowledged that this was in relation to an area where the DMA will in future apply. But in the interim, and sort of before it's too late, in the reasoning of the French competition authority, it saw its role as imposing injunctive relief. And I think that may also be something that could go higher. I could go further. I could go on about sort of roles of competition authorities around Europe helping enforce the DMA, about private enforcement, which I'm sure we will see plenty of in Europe. But so that's a little bit the context. Now, then to your final question about any guidance for COMESA, I'll be modest. It's not my place here to give guidance. Will we see sort of a worldwide web of regulation emerging? Well, maybe. But I think there is, as really articulated very well in terms of the different options that are out there, and different options might be the right tool at different points in time. And so I think we heard Bill yesterday saying, well, you've got other fish to fry first, and that's, I think, a legitimate viewpoint. Others will, of course, also flag that the digital economy in emerging markets like COMESA is, of course, so important, so crucial that you also don't want to find yourself in the situation of being too late. But I would caution that regulation is not a simple solution, as I mentioned. It requires also lots of resources. It involves process, it involves due process, for sure, as well, which is important for any lawyer in the room. And I would maybe say as a second caution, maybe also look at the facts, look at those markets and look, do they require regulation? It's not a question of just copycatting, but really analyzing what is the best sort of medicine, if you want, in a particular market situation, and also don't assume that it's sort of exactly the same practices, exactly the same companies, but that needs to be analyzed first. So that's all I wanted to say on that.
Thank you very much, Thomas. I think the art is always, where do you draw the line of regulation? And I think with that, I'd like to ask Marek. Marek, you've had the benefit of hearing our colleagues on the panel. What are your views? What are the challenges of this? Is there a shift from enforcement to regulation? Well, what are your views? And as an academic, Chatham House rules apply.
Thank you so much. Many thanks to organizers, to COMESA, for bringing us together and being such a wonderful hosts and creating such a wonderful space for learning and trust building and fostering of this conversation. Thank you for the questions, and indeed, allow me to make 2 points. First is really about this shift that we are seeing. Even the naming of this panel, have a look. It's about regulation of competition in the dynamic world, not about enforcement. No one mentioned enforcement, right? And as an academic, if you zoom out a little bit, not too long ago, we've been often hearing that in competition law it's about 3 things: enforcement, enforcement, and enforcement. And it seems that today the mood of the day is regulation. We had a wonderful list presented by Teresa earlier today. Everybody's regulating, not only in the digital space. Think about foreign subsidies regulation in European Union and what's happening in that space. Lots of regulation. Regulation is the mood of the day. And invisible hand is not going to sort these issues for us, so that's quite important. And regulation is not only about ex-ante regulation, right? This may be by means of commitments, by means of comfort letters. So this may be negotiated solutions with firms individually. So it seems there is more appetite for that. And that creates challenges all over the world. Definitely in terms of capacity, because we are looking at different issues, new challenges, new situations, so a lot of learning, and the need of upskilling, of understanding these processes, right? So that will be important. And this is also about technological expertise, right? Not necessarily to regulating going forward, but think about the old economy cases, hardcore cartels, they are also learning. They are also exploring, exploiting technological advances. They may be using more sophisticated means of communication. I've been talking to a colleague in one of the consultancies advising internationally, using emojis to fix prices. How you go about that? How you go about evidence kept in databases, kept in the cloud, far, far away, right? This means that many of you in the agencies, we need capacity to deal with that. Sophisticated software, sophisticated stuff. Huge, huge issue. And this is also about different way of thinking, not about ex post enforcement, but future-facing shaping of the markets. Different mindset, right? One of the challenges. Now allow me to mention second point about limitation of remedies. I do quite a bit of work on cross-border issues, and not long ago we've been often hearing that newer agencies should not perhaps be too concerned about some of the big cases, big transnational cases, because maybe one of the larger agencies will crack them and will free ride benefit from the work of others. Sounds amazing, such a nice thing, right? The issue is that it may not work. I've done some work on export cartels, and we know that sometimes export cartel face, challenged by EU may continue some other markets also in this region, and we have cases. Think about Anzac, Sodash, cracked in EU, continued in South Africa, challenged, continued in India, challenged. Simon Roberts from Crete is doing some amazing work about poultry and the effects of scrutiny outside Africa and consequences for Africa. Very interesting stuff, worth looking into this. But now if you think about the digital space, we have lots of algorithms-driven model businesses. And you see, if you impose remedy, algorithms can be adjusted only in relation to that specific enforcing market, which means in many other markets, these remedies may not operate. Teresa mentioned very progressively with this cosmopolitan spirit, yes, they should aim at the highest standard. But what if they don't? What if they follow the lowest requirement? That will be very challenging, which means that perhaps we need cases dealt with in different affected jurisdictions, and this also shows that regional integration bodies such as Arujos, COMESA have an extremely important role to play, because they can pick up these cases and they can craft remedies that will speak to needs of member states' needs and interests, and they may have more might to actually have these biggies comply. And I will stop here. Thank you so much.
Many thanks, Marek. I know we're going to have the last round of comments from the panel before we then open it to the floor for questions. So I think I'm going to go back to Hardin. Hardin, are there any specific lessons? I mean, it's a journey. We're at the beginning of a journey. But are there any specific lessons that South Africa can share? And I'd like you to take out your crystal ball and say, well, where's the future? Where does the future lie? I mean, it's very complicated questions, but in like 2-3 minutes, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And as you have heard, we have become digital disruptors in what we are trying to do. But I don't think, Thomas, maybe you meant that, because what we are seeing now is that there is really a challenge that we are facing with these markets. And I think the question is really what is the right strategy and how best to execute the strategy. I think Frederick Jane started, giving us some insights that do we have to be prosecuting these cases individually? You won't see the prosecutions because the heads of authorities on this continent are in talks, and these are serious talks about how best should we be approaching these markets, particularly from an enforcement perspective. what kinds of cases should we be selecting? And this is where we have to assess our capabilities and ability to coordinate. But this is something that the authorities started last year. The 5 authorities, more have joined this year. We had a session in Egypt. So you are going to see some movement on the continent because the platforms we are dealing with, fortunately, they are not invisible. We know them. We experience them every day. We can see what other authorities are doing, and it's really a matter of time for the continent to rise and deal with these issues. We have picked this up. I mean, we have been doing a market inquiry. Unfortunately, we just finalizing the inquiry, but you do, find some resistance from some leading, platforms in even where, there may be solutions elsewhere. So, but I think these are things that maybe a lesson for us, I think, is to really try strengthen and fast track the coordination on the continent. We now know that the AFCFTA competition policy protocol is quite advanced. It does signal the need to enforce these issues at a continental level, but that might be maybe medium to long term because it's a process. But I think we need to maybe, as I've said, we've joined forces. I'm hoping that maybe towards the end of this year, we have an ACF biennial conference in the Gambia later this year. These are issues that will be squarely on the agenda. And I think what we have picked up is that these are not things that we should be going alone. These are things that we should be working together. We not only on the continent, we do engage with the authorities in other parts of the world. So this is what I think has been our observations and some challenges and maybe areas of focus that are worth considering. Thank you.
Thank you, Hardin. I'll ask Boniface for your closing comments on these same issues, please.
Yes. I think this is a space in which lends itself very much to collaboration and coordination, especially in the context of our African countries, because of the sizes of the platforms you're dealing with, and also for the need to be effective in having an effective remedy that addresses then the various challenges that they pose. And Kenya is part of the initiative that Hardin is referring to in terms of collaborating in enforcement in this regard. But additionally for us, we've had some cases that we have also tried to undertake enforcement action that I would want to share. One is with regard to the on-demand courier services, the Glovos, the Uber Eats, and and similar companies. We were investigating those for price, discrimination, predatory pricing. We were not able to find a contravention, but we were nevertheless able to extract some commitments with regard to the terms of some of those which we saw very clearly would ultimately lead to a contravention at some stage, or rather were in contravention of the provisions of our law. We equally had another case on the USSD. USSD is, I think it's, I don't know the full name, but it's something supplementary service data, unstructured supplementary service data, which is the channel that you use to communicate, in terms of you send an SMS either to your bank when you may not be having internet and you're able to transact. We did an inquiry in our country and we established that the way the charges for USSDs were being done, there was a lot of price discrimination. So some people were paying as much as 90% less than others. And we were able to undertake enforcement action, and that reduced to a uniform rate, which now has reduced, fortunately, by more than 90%. So it's a very minimal rate, equivalent of 1 shilling, 1 Kenya shilling. And I think an additional point I want to make in this space is that sometimes it calls for some kind of caution, because for instance, in that contravention on USSD which we established, we had two options. We had the option of going for the hard enforcement, where you go through the entire rigors of investigation, penalizing, and the party, of course, the entity has capacity to appeal to the tribunal, and that delays how long the remedy comes to the market. So we realized that instead of opting for that, why not opt for soft enforcement, where you say, I want this remedy to be implemented in 3 months, and I'll not go through the rigors of investigation, but these are the outcomes that we expect as an authority, and that is the route that we took. And that facilitated, a remedy that was very quick. And that played a very significant role in Kenya when there was COVID, because we had significant lockdowns and people had to rely substantially on the internet for normal things, for all goods and services, more or less. The other issue is also about the timing of your intervention. When Uber, for instance, launched in Kenya, there was a lot of political clamor for them to be stopped, so that we're saying they're coming in, they are disrupting a traditional taxi system, which has been a mode of enterprise for many citizens since independence. So this foreign entity apparently wants to basically steal, ability of our people to participate in this business and take it over. And of course, the government felt in Kenya at that time that, look, the Competition Authority is the most well-equipped institution, pursuant, of course, to our abuse of dominance. But of course, you understand very well as a competition practitioner is that if I'm just coming into a market, you cannot accuse me of being a dominant player. And as an authority, then we advise the government that, look, this is a new mode of doing the business. We don't feel that it's comfortable at this stage when they're just starting off to try and stop them from doing business. And as a result of our advisory, which was taken up, of course, gradually, currently right now in Kenya, we even have local digital taxi apps, in very many towns. So the sector has grown. The convenience of the customer has increased, because previously to get a taxi, you had to go to a particular place. Right now, you call a taxi to your place. The prices are competitive. You choose the product that suits your pocket. So we noticed that the employment of that business has gone up. So we realized that caution of saying, look, we don't want to enforce at this stage. We better advise, look, let's take time and see what happens. Right now, the issue of digital taxis is no longer an issue in Kenya, because everybody appreciates the usefulness and necessity of the service. So I think that is what I want to share with this forum at this stage. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. That's really quite an interesting case study. And I'm going to just go for Thomas, your closing remarks. Where do you think the EU is headed? Or we take out your crystal ball?
Where we're headed is an interesting question indeed. Obviously, difficult to predict. I'll pick up on one of the comments that was made about the developments of apps and so on, because I think one of the trends that we are seeing in Europe is one of broadening merger control. I did want to say just a couple of words on merger control. And that's related to the perception that certain mergers in innovative sectors that should have been reviewed were never reviewed, typically because the relevant thresholds were just not met. And that's the question about the killer acquisitions, the reverse killer acquisitions, potential competition, etc. All sorts of mergers that sort of did not hit the regulators' radar screen for sort of these structural reasons. And what's been done in Europe in a way about that is three different things. First of all, at the level of a number of member states, thresholds were, for example, changed, or transaction value thresholds were introduced to capture, in particular, those kind of transactions, but and this is also true for, say, the life sciences sector, for example, where you have sort of similar concerns. Then secondly, the European Commission has changed its policy with respect to referrals. You may have heard about the Illumina Grail case in Europe, and which indeed plays on a worldwide basis. But very much in the context of that case, the European Commission has now decided to accept referrals even for mergers that do not hit either the thresholds at member state level or indeed at EU level, by definition in that case, and allowing therefore the member states to bring those cases to the Commission to look at them. You could say that that's maybe two negatives making a positive, but actually the European Court has endorsed that, despite potentially sort of the legal certainty issues that were involved in such a change of policy. But that's now established, and the European Commission has signaled they are there to give guidance, etc. And then a third point is in relation to the DMA. Designated gatekeepers will have to report all of their planned M&A activity regardless of any thresholds. And the European Commission has also power to prohibit a transaction from happening. So where does that take us all in relation to Europe? I think if you combine sort of competition law, merger control, and regulation, you will have, I think, quite a dynamic set of rules interplaying. I haven't even touched upon sort of the similar rules that apply at member state level, and then the UK has its whole separate set of rules as well. So certainly, yes, lots of debate ahead of us, I would say.
Thank you very much. Marek, your closing comments on these issues?
Allow me just to say that to take this broader lens and note that what we're hearing on this panel is definitely that these are very important problems affecting great many people, that there is lots of good thinking already being done by the agencies and some bottom-up movement, which is great. There is no doubt that there is understanding that it will be very difficult to deal with these issues on your own, especially if you are a smaller market. There is understanding that together we can achieve more, and I think this is wonderful. And allow me just to say this, that all this shows, and the experience of great many countries, is that this can be done. So the enforcement and regulation glass is half full. Yes, we can. Thank you.
Many thanks. And I'd like to bring the debate full circle back to Teresa. Teresa, you've had the benefit of the debate on the panel. We'd like you to
Thank you very
give your
much.
closing comments too, please.
I just want to make 2 points, which I don't think I made well enough. First is to draw the attention to the, let's say, the constraints of regulation, because of course I was thinking of the Digital Markets Act of the EU, which, for those who are not fully familiar, gives the European Commission a concurrent power. So the Competition Commission, the European Commission, DG Comp, of course, is the enforcer of competition law, at the EU level, and at the same time, now it is a regulator in what concerns what the companies that will be designated or that are being designated as gatekeepers. I'm not sure that ex-ante regulation or any other kind of regulation in this sector in other jurisdictions will be conferred to the competition authority. So you already may be facing here an additional challenge, which is how do you bring together different bodies when working and focusing on digital markets. So I wanted to highlight this. I did not want to make it look too easy, because it's not. I think the European situation is actually quite particular. The second point, a little bit picking up on what Thomas said, I do think that merger control at regional level can actually be extremely useful. Well, first of all, it's how can I put it? There's it's not a sort of sanctioning power, so it's not enforcement at its best. Companies need to bring to the authorities all the necessary information, and authorities, of course, can very well choose to approve with commitments, actually ensuring that there will remain competition in the market, at least theoretically, or just use structural remedies. So I think maybe this is really an interesting tool to explore at regional level, namely by COMESA and others in the same position. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. I hope we've still got some time for questions from the floor. 5 minutes. The orders from above have been 5 minutes for questions. Any questions from the floor? I think there's a roving mic. Yeah. A colleague from Swaziland. Eswatini.
Thank you. I think this topic brings to question the work that has been done over many years, kind of harmonizing or at least converging competition laws, because the regulations seem to be quite different. And I'm wondering why there's so much competition instead of cooperation in doing these regulations. Everybody seems to be having their own initiative. Where is the convergence?
Very interesting question. I'm not sure. Thomas?
I don't have the answer, but I would add that indeed that's what you also hear from a number of the companies that know that they will be and are subject to regulation, but their plea, of course, is indeed one for consistency also in terms of the rules that they need to abide by, because if they are sort of ever so slightly different in different places. That's not going to contribute to compliance, but it's also not going to be to the benefit of the consumer at the end of the day. So I think indeed there is a case to be made for more harmonization there.
No, thank you. I wanted to resist answering that question from the recently retired. But I think it's a very difficult one, because what seems to be emerging, and I think this is the theme of what maybe we suggest, that we have a regional approach. Regional approach, I mean at least a continental level. If it's difficult at that level, it can start at the level of COMESA. In fact, for the continent, we do have, quite strong regions that can even get together and start thinking collectively about these solutions. So COMESA, ECOWAS, SADC is there. So, and I think what maybe needs to happen is really meaningful steps, because I did read up something 2002 by Paul Crompton. In South Korea, he was doing some work for the OECD, and I think he was there was this debate then about whether competition versus regulation, what ought to be the pathway. And I think he made a very important point that we need to really help each other. So we must help each other, we must work together so that we do not keep repeating what others are doing elsewhere, which I think what the former commissioner will now talk about, competition amongst authorities, which Thomas will obviously rightly call that disruption of the market. So I think it's really a challenge for heads of authorities that are here to really lead us into that promised land. The CEO is here. I see he's really taking in this message. Thank you very much.
I suppose, the challenges of convergence and harmonization is, of course, not limited to the technological digital space. But are there any other comments? These will be the final comments. No more questions, but do you have any? I don't know. Marek?
Maybe just mention that we have lots of divergence with great many areas of law. And even if you think about bigness, regulation of bigness in European Union, the regulation of bigness in United States, completely different despite decades of cooperation. We have different societal values. Maybe divergence in some areas is unavoidable, right? And these firms can adapt locally. They are all based on algorithms. That's not such a huge thing for them. So maybe that's, not the end of the day. It would be lovely if it was all the same, but we can live with complexity.
I don't know. Maybe also it's good to appreciate. I think as much as we have divergences, I think these divergences are caused by the peculiar, national situations that you find yourself in. In Kenya, for instance, you have a particular market structure that has certain challenges posed by the people who operate in this digital space. So I agree that our ultimate aim and goal should be to have a convergency. And if you look at the continental situation, for instance, that is the intention, that we have one continental competition agency. But as competition agencies in various countries, we're dealing with life problems. So as much as that is the ultimate aim, we might have to have divergent ways of addressing our individual, challenges that need to be addressed at the moment. But I also agree that there's room for the regional competition agencies like COMESA and EAC to play a more active role in leading the way. Thank you.
Peter? I think we've unfortunately run out of time. Lots of interesting issues, but I'm sure the debate can continue after the panel. Please join me in thanking the panel for a really good debate.
A very big thank you to Mr. Peter Steyn, our chair for this session, regulation of competition in a dynamic world. The session was interesting. Let's give them a big hand once again. Another round of applause. And Mr. Steyn, thank you for managing your time very well with the last session of the day. We'll allow the panel to have their group photo taken, and as they do that, let me take the opportunity to make a few announcements before we move to the next item on our program, which is an award ceremony. My protocol team has asked me to just alert you, our distinguished guests, that there are some changes to the times in our flights. So maybe pay attentively. Tomorrow, Ethiopian Airways flights ET020 will be departing to Johannesburg at 10 minutes past 8. And this means that the airport shuttle will be ready from 5:30 a.m. in the morning, and the last pickup will be at 6 a.m. So take note of that. And let me just repeat that. Flights Ethiopian Airways 020 will be departing to Johannesburg at 10 minutes past 8, and the airport shuttle will be ready from 5:30, that's in the morning, and the last pickup will be at 6 a.m. Then flight ET035, that's Ethiopian Airways, departing to Lusaka at 10:30, and the airport shuttle will be ready from 7:30 in the morning, and the last pickup will be at 8 a.m. That's flight ET035. And for flights Kenyan Airways KQ756, departing to Nairobi at 14:25 hours, that's 25 minutes past 5 in the afternoon. The airport shuttle will be ready from 11 in the morning, and the last pickup will be at 11:30. Please take note of that. Flight KQ756, departing to Nairobi at 14:25 hours p.m. Airport shuttle will be ready from 11:45 hours, and the last pickup will be at 1200 hours at noon. Thank you. And for the flights ET8, I think I just mentioned that one, but flight SA 172, that's South African Airways, departing to Johannesburg at 3 p.m. That's 1500 hours. The airport shuttle will be ready at 1200 hours at 12 p.m. noon. Please take note of that. Thank you very much. A note to Ethiopian Airlines flights to Addis Ababa. Departure time has changed to 14:45. Departure time for Ethiopian Airlines flights to Addis Ababa has changed to 14:45. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. If in case I might have missed something, you might want to check with the protocol team before you leave so that you're sure of the times for your flights tomorrow. Thank you once again. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me at this point, without much further ado, as we move on to indeed the climax of our program for our conference, to invite the Director and Chief Executive Officer for COMESA Competition Commission, Dr. Willard Mwemba, who will take us through a special award-giving ceremony. And I'll also like to ask the board chairperson for COMESA Competition Commission, Ms. Ellen Ruparanganda, to assist the director on stage for this award ceremony. Let's welcome them on stage. A big round of applause for them. Thank you.
Where's the mic? I use this one. The microphone. But how do we? It will be complicated.
Okay, so here we are today with the last set of awards, and
The first award today goes to Mr. Derek Lotter. He's been given a Legal Practitioner's Award for his contribution to the refinement of the COMESA competition rules and guidelines. We used to have so many debates with Mr. Lotter in the early days of the COMESA Competition Commission. Please, sir, walk forward. The next award goes to Mr. Nkonzo Klachwayo. He equally gets the Legal Practitioner's Award for his contribution to the refinement of the COMESA competition rules and guidelines. Nkonzo was actually very influential to the reduction of major notification fees, Chair, and also the introduction of major notification thresholds. As you heard yesterday, I had a very heated debate in our boardroom with him, with so many drawings on me justifying that. But later on, we did change. Unfortunately, Nkonzo is not here. He did receive a bereavement in the family yesterday. I think his brother passed on, so he had to leave us today. So sincere condolences to Nkonzo, but we will keep his award. The next one goes to Mr. Sidney Chisenga. He equally gets a Legal Practitioner's Award for his contribution to the refinement of the COMESA competition rules and guidelines. Mr. Chisenga, if you are here, please walk forward, sir. So we traveled with Mr. Chisenga wide and far and beyond to come up with some of the guidelines we have today. The next award would go to a lady who was very aggressive chairperson in our early days, and all the letters that she wrote, we used to argue and never agreed until we could argue no more and chose to agree. So we'll be awarding Ms. Annie Kinuhe in absentia, unfortunately. She's not with us. We are giving her the Legal Practitioner's Award for her contribution also to the refinement of the COMESA competition rules and guidelines through her very aggressive letters that she wrote. We learned a lot of things from those.
So you can just give a round of
We
applause.
do that, yes. The next one goes to a lady who was equally very aggressive, but was like Mr. Derek Lotter. So Mr. Derek Lotter was very aggressive, but he would always start with, "we respectively." Then with respect, then he would write a long, long, long argument. This was similarly the approach by Ms. Joyce Karanja, who has been awarded the Legal Practitioner's Award for her contribution to the refinement of the COMESA competition rules and guidelines. So Joyce would always respectively disagree with the COMESA Competition Commission. The next category of awards will be going to the business reporters, those that we've been with the last couple of years. And the first one goes to Mr. Gerald Andai. the Business Reporters Award for his contribution to providing publicity on the activities of the COMESA Competition Commission. I should confess that Gerard has written a lot in the Kenyan newspaper called the Business Daily, and his writings are very well thought through and researched. And as you heard yesterday, he was democratically elected as the president of the COMESA Business Forum. Thank you, Gerard. The next one goes to Mr. Sam Sanya, a business reporter from Uganda, who has been awarded the Business Reporters Award for his contribution to providing publicity on the activities of the COMESA Competition Commission. Mr. Sam. And it shows that in the COMESA Business Forum, there's Democrats chair. Mr. Sam contested the position, but he didn't petition the election. The next award will be in absentia. Mr. Tinashe N. Makichi from Zimbabwe is not with us today, but he's been awarded the Business Reporters Award for his contribution to providing publicity on the activities of the COMESA Competition Commission. I guess we can applaud him in absentia as well. The next award goes to a journalist from Mauritius, Ms. Hesha Boru. I hope I've pronounced it well. But Ms. Hesha has written quite a lot of articles, very good and well-researched articles on the CCC in COMESA, both in Mauritius, both in French and in English. Please walk forward, ma'am. Okay. The next award goes to Mr. Andreas Staggard. This is a gentleman who is very difficult to categorize. Is he a lawyer? Is he a journalist? You find it's very difficult to give him which award, but we are calling him the influential, we are giving him an influential writers award on antitrust matters and his contribution to providing constructive criticism that assisted in refining the procedures and processes of the COMESA Competition Commission. Congrats, congrats. Last but the least is a gentleman called Mr. Mayeso Chikadzula. Mr. Mayeso Chikadzula works for the national broadcaster here in Malawi. He has given the COMESA Competition Commission lots of coverage and audience, and those of you will be able to watch even MBC, Malawi Broadcasting Corporation today. You see something about us since the last 2 days, Chair. We recognize him for that. So, Chair, we are now fired. Our job is over. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Willard Mwemba. Thank you very much, Ms. Ellen Ruparanganda. And congratulations to the all the people who have received their awards. Let's give them another big round of applause. Congratulations. And what a way to end a very beautiful conference. I'm sure it's befitting indeed to reward those that have contributed in various positive ways. But ladies and gentlemen, I know goodbyes are hard, but I think unfortunately all good things come to an end. And but it's been a very, very beautiful 3 or 4 days that we've spent together. And indeed, we hope you enjoyed your stay in Malawi. To our international guests, we do hope that you come back. And once again, for inviting all of us to celebrate the 10th year anniversary. The CCC has proven indeed that they are giants. And congratulations on the 10 years. And all the best for the many more years to come. The celebration of the 10th year anniversary, I think, deserves for all of us to just stand and give the CCC a big round of applause. Thank you very much. Thank you, distinguished guests. I would like to invite Commissioner Mr. Brian Lingela, the Vice Board Chairperson for COMESA Competition Commission, to give us closing remarks. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Director of Ceremonies. The guests of honor, Honorable Simplex Chitiola, Minister of Trade and Industry, Member of Parliament, Republic of Malawi, His Lordship Justice Rizin Mzikamanda, Senior Counsel, Chief Justice, Republic of Malawi, His Lordship Honorable Justice Luke Malava, Chief Justice, Republic of Zimbabwe. I recognize also Judge Peter Njoroge, High Court Judge, Republic of Kenya. And at this point, allow me to pause and thank our honorable justices for staying through this particular conference, the entire 2 days. I think that it is rare that you have such a situation. A round of applause to our Excellence Madam Chile Shempundu Kapwepwe, Secretary General for the Common Market for Eastern and Southern Africa, Madam Adefunke Ademi, Secretary General of the African Civil Aviation Commission, Your Excellency, ambassadors representing various missions that are accredited to the Republic of Malawi. May I also recognize His Excellency Mr. Yahya Bela, First Under Secretary of the Ministry of Trade and Industry, Republic of Egypt, Honorable Mr. Teshao Kafen, State Minister, Republic of Trade and Regional Integration, Federal Republic of Ethiopia. I do recognize our Chair of the COMESA Board of Commissioners, Madam Elaine Ruparanganda. I also recognize my fellow commissioners of the competition, of the COMESA Competition Commission, Dr. Willard Mwemba, Director and CEO. I do recognize you, and may I also recognize our former and current heads of competition authorities that are still with us. I recognize also our partners, legal practitioners, academicians that are present here, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, and may I just say all protocols observed. I must say I'm very privileged on behalf of the BICC to have to deliver closing remarks at this particular event, and may I take this opportunity to sincerely thank all of you for making this particular commemoration a great success, and once more a round of applause to all of us. And it is safe, I think, for me to conclude that this has been a great conference. Congratulations to the Commission. Thank you to all our speakers, our panelists, discussants, and facilitators, including the team from our Secretariat for organizing this very historic and also successful event. And today marks the end of this momentous occasion, and I am sad to be the one to disrupt this very joyful event. But anyway, everything always has to come to an end. Over the years, the Commission has taken very bold steps to combat anti-competitive behavior and create a level playing field. I will not delve into that because over the last 2 days, we have seen the success story that the Commission has achieved. And as our esteemed panelists have reminded us over the course of the last 2 days, the takeaway for all of us should be the fact that competition law remains a critical input to the achievement of a single market imperative, as expressly recognized in the COMESA Treaty. And during the conference, I think we did discuss the contribution of competition policy and law to our respective economies by increasing market access and by challenging some of the artificial barriers and restrictions in our various economies. In the words of Professor William Kovacic over there, we talk about the fullest realization of human potential and capabilities. And through its various enforcement actions, advocacy efforts, and capacity building initiatives, the Commission has helped foster a culture of competition and protecting consumers in the common market. It has been everyone's pleasure during the course of this conference to exchange knowledge, information, ideas, and best practices with all the experts in the field, and that we do sincerely appreciate. It is particularly humbling to see a lot of our partners having traveled across oceans, across continents, across borders, just to come and support the BICC. We are sincerely grateful for your support, and we will always cherish that. As we move forward, it is our commitment as BICC to continue promoting more and more collaborative efforts in the fight against anti-competitive trade practices in our economies, and also the protection of our much cherished consumers in the common market. It reminds me of Professor Jenny's presentation this morning, which delivered rather passionately, calling upon more effective and efficient cooperation among ourselves as competition authorities, and instead of us spending resources haphazardly. And I think that former Deputy Commissioner South Africa, Tembinkosi Bonakale, did in the last but one session raise that particular question, which we must, going forward, as enforcers particularly, think very critically about. Ladies and gentlemen, another key topic that we discussed yesterday was the importance of the rule of law and also the tenet of natural justice. And I think that our honorable justices seated here did remind us about the fact that all the institutions of COMESA are established by the COMESA Treaty, and to that end bound by it, including the national courts. It is therefore for this reason that our courts have a responsibility to drive the regional integration agenda through the enforcement of our competition rules. The judiciary, going forward, will continue playing an important role in interpreting our laws in a manner that is fair, transparent, and also expedient. Judge Dennis Davis, and I think Mr. Tula Kaira also fittingly described competition law as a field which remains complex, but I think that the important thing is that we have got to ensure that even as we come before the judiciary, we have the appropriate economic agency. I beg your pardon, we have the appropriate economic evidence. At the BICC, we recognize the need to empower our judiciary in our member states with the necessary skills to analyze and interrogate the economic evidence that we are, as enforcers, expected to bring before your chambers, together with the legal practitioners. And I must say that the Commission is committed to that in as far as providing the much needed capacity building. I think that the Director did allude to that. And also our intentions to establish a regional competition center. It is a matter that is in our strategic plan, and going forward, it is something that we look forward to implementing. And as we celebrate this milestone anniversary, and as we come to the close of the event, I must say that we do recognize that there are challenges that lie ahead. With the evolution of the digital economy that is moving very rapidly, and I think that one of the sessions emphasized on that. We are alive to the fact that we have got to deal with anti-competitive trade practices, consumer violations in the digital space. And in the common market, a lot of our consumers are transacting digitally and online. And as we take stock of this 10-year anniversary, it is important that we look forward to this and leverage on our experience in ensuring that we prepare ourselves for the challenges that lie ahead. With these words, once more, congratulations to CCC. Thank you for joining us in this particular commemoration. And it is my sincere hope on behalf of the Board of Commissioners that the Commission will continue to thrive and flourish in the years to come. At this juncture, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I now declare our commemoration event closed. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. We hope you all have a lovely evening and a safe trip back home for our international guests. Thank you once again for spending some time with us. Goodbye and all the best. Thank you.